Lieutenant Colonel Mann, I am so grateful that you shared the story of Hasina Safi, former Minister of Women's Affairs. Today is International Women's Day, and it is heartbreaking beyond words to think of thousands of brave, smart, capable Afghan women and girls barred from their schools and workplaces, confined to their homes, prevented from accessing basic necessities and even life-saving health care. Why did it fall to Task Force Pineapple to extract Minister Safi? Should the Department of State have made every diplomatic effort to bring her out of danger?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We were very surprised when the bulk of our focus was on Afghan special operators, and when we learned that Minister Safi was on the run, it came as a real shock. What I do know is that Ambassador at Large Kelly Curry, who had worked Women's Global Affairs, was helping to guide her along with a range of other women leaders. And they had tried time and time again to include reaching directly out to Washington, D.C. I mean, understand that Hasina Safi was the Minister of Women's Affairs. She was one of 4 female ministers in the entire country, and arguably the most wanted and hunted woman in Afghanistan at that time. Her ministry actually became the Ministry of Virtue and Vice as the Taliban took over, ironically. And so she was on the run. No one from the State Department brought her in. And so what she ended up doing was it was coordinated for her to move into what we called the Pineapple Express, which was moving through the open sewage canal with her family and up to a point of recognition where this young man right here and a couple of other paratroopers pulled her inside the wire. And one thing I'll just say, I have to throw a shout out to the 82nd Airborne on this one. She had a terrible fear of soldiers from when she was a child as a refugee. The Russian soldiers, the Soviets, had really abused her father. So when she learned it wasn't the sewage canal that terrified her, it was going and having to be confronted with NATO soldiers. And she was terrified about it. And it was his first sergeant, Jesse Kennedy, who in the middle of the night reached down and grabbed her hand and pulled her out. And he said, "My name's Jesse, you're safe now." And Hasina says that when she went into that canal, she had 5 brothers, but when she came out, she had 6, and they're still in contact to this day. So I don't know fully why a sitting minister was not brought in by the State Department, but I do know that had it not been for the 82nd Airborne and the people right there at that hole in the fence, that she probably wouldn't have made it.
I thank you all. I appreciate the chair's indulgence. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Sherman.
Thank you. One of the most difficult things for our intel community to do is to apprise will to fight. They can look at the number of weapons and capacity and see who can fight, but the question is who will. And they've gotten it wrong a couple times in just last couple of years. They analyzed the Afghan army, determined that they could fight successfully for at least, say, 4 months. And then they looked at Ukraine and they thought the Ukrainian people might cave in 4 days. Turned out to be wrong in both cases. That doesn't mean they're not the best in the world. It just means determining the will of a soldier to fight is very difficult. One of the things that strikes me not only about this evacuation, but others, is American citizens go to a war zone and they say, I just want to go anywhere I want. My government's supposed to protect me. And there are limits on what the U.S. government can do. So I put forward the SAFE Act, and I'd like to have some more co-sponsors when I do it again this year, to say that if Americans go to a war zone, they would register. They're encouraged to now, but we would require them to register. We saw 15,000 American citizens in 2006 in Lebanon with a lack of registration, and that was identified in the GAO report as a significant problem in getting Americans out of Lebanon. We started this evacuation, and obviously we're focusing on Afghans who are our friends and eligible for immigration, but the absolute core of the American government's responsibilities to American citizens and green card holders. Mr. Lisser In October 2021, before this committee, the Deputy Secretary of Management and Resources for the State Department said that the withdrawal would have been easier as to U.S. citizens, and that's the focus here, if those citizens had been required to register with the embassy. You have experience in dealing with the withdrawal of American citizens. Do you agree?
Thank you for the question, sir. Yes, this was one of the areas in which my organization sought to assist and make the evacuation go smoother. We had an open intake form through which folks could either be referred to us or could self-register. Among those were many American citizens, at least about 88 during the 2-week NEO period.
If I can interrupt, were there people who hadn't registered 2 or 3 months before the withdrawal that then were seeking help and we didn't know where they were, situations where had people registered when they went into the war zone, it would have been more helpful?
Yes, sir. That was one of the primary difficulties. That's what make groups like mine necessary, is that data submission that you're talking about that could have happened ahead of time.
Hope to get some more co-sponsors on the SAFE Act. I've got another question for you. I don't know if it's come up here, but there have been criticisms of the Biden administration for the fact that weapons that we provided the Afghan army we did not recover on our way out. So these weapons were spread out over a very big country, or fairly large country, Afghanistan. They were, by definition, in the hands of armed men. Mr. Lusser, if we had wanted to go and reclaim these weapons and sent American military all over where those weapons were and demanded their return, could we have done that and gotten those weapons back without any American casualties?
While I'm not a military logistics expert, that certainly would seem just common sense to have been an incredibly difficult task as we attempted to retrograde from that country, sir.
Yes. The fact is that it's very difficult to leave a hostile situation and withdraw and do it in a pristine manner. We saw in Vietnam, and I know Mr. Ong's family saw in Vietnam, how difficult that is, and that was with a South Vietnamese military that was far more impressive than the Afghan military. We had, but just around the world, withdrawals are difficult. They're never pristine. They're never organized. They never go to plan. And finally, of course, the Trump administration did not do any of the interviews to identify the SIVs, did not prepare for this withdrawal. America decided we didn't want a forever war, and there's no pristine way to withdraw. I yield back.
When yields, Chair recognizes Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't plan on responding to the previous round of questions, but I just want to contrast perhaps what was just said. President Trump left office in January. Colonel Mann, when did you first know there was going to be a hasty withdrawal or withdrawal of Americans?
I started to suspect that things were coming off the rails and that it was going to be a very, very chaotic withdrawal around late April. And that was mainly because my friend Nizam was sending play-by-play signal texts on the falling of each district. Okay, so areas of this of the conflict began to change in April. When were you first notified by the State Department that your services would be needed to help evacuate American citizens? I never received direct notification from the State Department that our help would be needed. To your knowledge, were either you or our American allies, were they aware of anything before basically the embassy evacuated in the night without notice? No, Congressman. August 15th was when everything started for us. Okay. So in the 8 months between the departure of President Trump and the hasty withdrawal in the night without telling our allies, our NATO allies, if there was planning, it certainly didn't come to those who then took it on themselves to help get American citizens out, right? I think that's correct, Congressman. Okay, I want to go over some numbers very quickly.
to your knowledge, you and the other partners that were helping get Americans out, you totaled numbers, by names and numbers of people. Was that a handful of people that you totaled up were left behind as of August 15th?
It was a much larger, I would think of a handful,
was
much
it
larger.
50 or 100?
It was in the hundreds, probably pushing closer to 1,000. Not in Pineapple, but in the various groups as we talked to each other.
Okay, so various groups who reported, as you did, to the State Department and coordinated with them, would give numbers. That number was greater than 100 or 200, greater than 300 or 400, actually greater than 500 or more by name of American citizens, right?
Memory's a little foggy, but I would feel comfortable saying greater than 500.
So how is it the State Department and the president's spokesperson were talking about numbers that were always less than, a handful and then later less than 100? Did you give your numbers and did the other organizations give their numbers to the State Department and thus to the administration?
I can only speak I know for Pineapple, we were consistently submitting names and information on American citizens and green card holders that we were helping.
Okay, and the only way somebody got out essentially was after the fall was names were given, the State Department then passed that on to the Qatar government, and they allowed them to be manifested onto those planes coming in from Doha Airlines, right? Qatar Airways.
Well, the first challenge during the period of the NEO was to actually get them inside the perimeter. For us, that was an even bigger challenge than getting them on an airplane, was getting them inside the wire.
Did you ever get, or you or your people ever get to the fence with blue passports in hand and be turned away?
Yes.
So American citizens got to the fence. There's American or NATO person on the other side, and they were unable to get through the fence. Why was that?
Just to be clear, the American citizen that we were helping was told to go to a specific gate by the State Department. When he got to that gate, thinking he was going to load a bus with his family, it was actually a Taliban checkpoint, and they were beaten.
And so Taliban turned him away.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. One of the challenges that I keep asking, and I'm for any of the one on the panel is, did any of you get or participate in any part of planning of this, what Mr. Sherman called always chaotic withdrawal? Did any of you participate in April in any planning for withdrawal of Americans? Did any of you participate in May? Did any of you participate in June? Just raise your hand if you participated in June in planning for the withdrawal.
We didn't participate in the planning, Congressman, but starting in April, we started calling for the inclusion of Afghan allies in the withdrawal of troops. And we had a sustained advocacy strategy that crescendoed over time and culminated on August 15th when we had to pivot to the civilian-led evacuation.
Right, but I'm talking about the actual plan for the embassy personnel to leave, the base to be closed. So at any time before August 15th, did any of you have any contact with American leaders, DOD or state or other agencies, that gave you an alert and the ability to plan the withdrawal of American citizens? So it's fair to say that the administration's chaotic withdrawal certainly included the fact that they didn't, the very people who got Americans out after August 15th, none of you were informed or given any opportunity to prepare prior to August 15th. Is that correct? Mr. Chairman, I know there's a lot of other things we're going to delve into, but I think the one fact that I would hope that we get to from the administration is, if they were planning between January, when they said that they were given this requirement to get out, and August when they left, if they were planning, I would like us to have the record of who they were planning with, so we would know why our NATO allies found themselves without transportation in addition to those Americans. And with that, I yield back.
Yeah, duly noted. Chair recognizes Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and thank all of you for being so brave, for what you did before and what you're doing today to tell your story. And you deserve our attention, and we want to hear from you. There's been a lot of pontificating up here with no questions, but you are the ones who really can advise us and inform us. I'd like to pick up on the last question about the communication between the administration and any of you all. Communication is a two-way street, and I know you have influence. You were in a previous administration. Mr. Mann, we've heard about all the connections you have. Did any of you, the two of you I'd ask first, reach out to the administration and express concern that, like the Inspector General's report, that this agreement that we were going to pull out was really abandoning Afghanistan, or that the Taliban would take over? You're in the field. Did you express that concern to them as part of the intelligence that they gathered, Mr. Mann?
Congresswoman, I did not explicitly engage the Biden administration or any of the governmental organizations. And the reason, if I could offer it, was leading up until August 15th, I really didn't intend to get involved with this.
Well, how about the Trump administration when the agreement was first made that set all this in motion?
What I will say is that I was very vocal publicly about both administrations and how they were handling the withdrawal, and that it was going the wrong direction. But that was the extent of my involvement with that.
Mr. Hahn?
Congresswoman, prior to August 15th, 2021, I had retired to private life and was not involved with policy matters at this level anymore.
Okay.
And it was only because of the urgent need that myself and many of the volunteers you see seated behind me saw that we jumped back into the fray.
All right, well, thank you. Sometimes hindsight's 20/20, and if we'd gotten involved earlier, you might not be able to have so much to criticize later. You talk about abandoning the Afghans. I don't want to abandon them again. So I'd like to ask you, every one of you, how you feel about the Afghan special immigrant visas. We heard from Mr. Cicilline how it took longer. There was a backlog. A lot of them had been cut out. We know that members of this committee, including 16 Republicans, voted against speeding up the Afghan special visas. Would that not be helpful now to maybe right some of the wrongs that occurred back August? Just go down the road and tell me if you do support extending those visas.
Yes, I think the SIV program is a very important program to help our Afghan allies. I think that there is a tremendous need to enable the executive branch to increase both the throughput and capacity to process those visas and transport the people who have been granted a visa or approval for a visa out of Afghanistan post-haste.
I know the immigration problem is bigger than this, but let's focus on this. I mean, we could be talking about temporary protected status or other things, but just this particular program. Do you
I would
support
agree.
that?
I would agree with extending SIVs continued as long as individuals are properly vetted and not bringing more threats into America.
Okay, so you feel comfortable with those people getting to come and be here and be by our side and a pathway to citizenship or whatever?
As long as they're properly vetted, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, yes, I support expanding the SIV system. It needs to be fixed. There's a lot of different fixes that we can get into in more detail at some other time. I would also say that SIVs are a very small slice of the Afghans who are left behind. Only a very small number of those would qualify for SIV visas as it's currently written.
Well, do we need to reform that process and expand that visa and so that more people would qualify for it?
Reform, expand the definitions of who is included in a family member would be a start.
And we can do that while still answering the question for gentleman next to you about keeping people safe and secure.
There is no more highly vetted individuals in this country than anybody who goes through our immigration system. The multiple checks at every layer for every kind of immigration status is insane. And what most Americans don't realize, and the SIVs are even more doubly vetted because they had to be requalified to work with our military every 6 months.
Exactly. So why would somebody vote against it? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. The SIV program is where I spend the majority of my time, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. Very briefly, on your previous question of worrying about the Afghan allies left behind, you might not remember this, Congressman Crow, but actually about 3 years ago, I was in your office with Common Defense, and we were asking about the End the Forever War campaign. And at the end of that, myself and another veteran spoke to you, and you said you were hesitant to sign on to the campaign because from your experience in Iraq, Kurds had been left behind, and you were worried about the exact same thing happening to our Afghan allies. It's a moment that stayed with me powerfully for a very long time.
Will you answer my question? We'll let Mr. Crow come.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, real quick.
Time.
So just like Camille said, every 6 months, they underwent incredibly vigorous background checks, which included polygraphs and counterintelligence screening. During the security screening process itself, they go through 17 different intelligence agencies kind of database checks. It takes 4 to 7 years to get an SIV. I'm in support of extending the program, but more so this backlog issue. There are both administrative and congressional fixes that could make this problem incredibly faster. And also, like she said, it also could be expanded or using other pathways to bring other at-risk people who currently are not included in the statutory requirements, who don't meet SIV, but who are incredibly at risk, who are also equally vetted, and who are facing a dire circumstance in Afghanistan right now. So absolutely, ma'am.
Perhaps that's where we should direct our energy, is improving that system so we don't abandon more people.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chairman recognizes Mr. Mast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say part of what, for myself, sharing my own personal story allows me to cope with the loss of friends and things like that each day is being haunted by the questions of, what if we took a different road? What if we were a foot to the left, a foot to the right? Constantly thinking about, what if we would have done that thing? Caring about it. The fact that I still care about it and still think about those people that I visit in Arlington, that helps me personally to cope with loss. And to answer Ranking Member Meek's question about should we have withdrawn from Afghanistan or not, whether somebody believes we should or should not have withdrawn, it is evident to everybody that it should not have been done in the manner in which it was done. But this administration is perfectly comfortable not being haunted by the losses that took place. I don't know how they live with that, because I wouldn't be able to. I want to ask some questions of you, Sergeant. You essentially lived in a tower with your team, your rifle, your ammo, a camera for 10 days?
That is correct.
Over those 10 days, those 10 nights, you were in there day and night?
Yes, we were.
In those 10 days and nights, did you witness the Taliban not letting people through their own checkpoint to get to your checkpoint?
Multiple times.
Did you witness the Taliban beating people?
Yes, we did.
Did you witness the Taliban executing people?
Yes.
Was this recorded?
We had footage of it, yes.
For those last 10 days, essentially, of the withdrawal, you were literally the front line. You were the front line of the withdrawal. It nearly took your life. So since that day, and in the 558 days and a wake-up since that time, have you ever been interviewed by any part of the United States government about what you witnessed on the front line?
Not by a single individual or organization.
So the Pentagon has never come to you and say, hey, you were in front, you were with your team, you were looking through the scope on your rifle. What did you see from those thousands of individuals out front?
Never.
The Marine Corps never asked you when you woke up in Walter Reed, hey, Sergeant, can you tell us from your perspective what took place?
No, they did not.
The State Department, Secretary Blinken, others, they never came to your room in Walter Reed and said, hey, can you tell us what did you see about the SIVs or others that were trying to get through to be processed?
No, they did not.
They never came and asked you, hey, is it true that people in the State Department were essentially knocking off at 6 p.m. or not processing individuals at nighttime when you were still having to sit in a tower at all hours?
No, they did not.
Battalion commander, company commander, did they ever come and ask you for your story?
A company commander in a personal capacity, yes, but not through the chain of command or on behalf of the Marine Corps.
CIA, FBI, anybody else, they never came to ask you, hey, can you tell us when you were looking through the scope on your rifle, what made you think that you identified the bomber?
No.
the intel folks that said, hey, this is what you're looking for on this day. We think it might be an individual that appears like this and traveling in this way and undertaking these actions. The intel folks didn't come and ask you afterwards, hey, what did you see through your rifle scope?
No, they did not.
Are you aware that at some point, some folks in the Pentagon made this statement that all the people near the blast were concussed or unreliable?
I am aware of that statement, yes.
How does that make you feel that you have not been asked, as somebody that was on the front line of this, that apparently they don't care to hear what you saw and what you witnessed?
Makes me feel like my service is not valued to this country by the government.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Ms. Wild.